Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Lamp. I'm your host, James Lampkin. And my guest today is the Minister of Music and the Youth Minister at our church, Miss Jayna Freeman. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, for sure.
How's everything going today?
Everything's going great. We got an extra hour of sunlight. I'm loving it. Definitely helps.
It don't mess up your sleep.
It doesn't. Well, maybe a little bit on the front end, but all in all, I'm an early bird, so you know, I'm gonna get up regardless. It's gonna be dark, but I like the light on the later end for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of messing with my sleep though. I'm like I was at work today. I was just so like I'm tired a lot at work, but I was even more tired today. Like it was just a struggle.
I get it. Trust me.
So the
Definitely.
reason we doing the podcast, because me and you was having a conversation about we was just talking about like people, more youth that's not going to church. And we was just throwing out some stuff. And I was like, I think it would be an interesting podcast to talk about. And you agree. So here we are.
Yes, here we are.
So let's start with you in the beginning. Like, have you always grew up in the church?
Yeah, I did. I was fortunate to have a mother and a father who, made sure that church was definitely a part of my upbringing. My mother actually we would spend Saturday mornings even just, right after watching cartoons, just we had our little colorful Bible and was sitting there and reading the Bible. And my grandfather, um, fortunate to have a lot of preachers in my family. So we went to my grandfather's church growing up in DC, Northeast DC, Upper Room Baptist Church. And so I
Hold on,
learned
you
a lot
said upper
there.
room?
Yeah, Upper Room.
That's old school right
Upper
there.
Room.
Upper
Old
room
school
Baptist
for
church.
real.
Goodness.
Yes. Old school for real. And so that was where I was there until I was 16. And then I was fortunate to connect with, an amazing ministry. Actually my dad, my now is my adopted dad, has a church, a Good Success Christian Church and Ministries, and I've been there without telling my age for longer than I was at my home church, but over 20 years at this point. So,
When you were a kid, did you actually enjoy going to church?
so funny thing is, I did enjoy going to church. And I say funny only because, you know, I will say that I was always drawn to music. Like that was my thing. So at my church, on my old school, growing up, I got baptized. I was about to turn 5 because that was the only way you could literally sing in the choir. And I knew when I was 4 and 5 I loved music and I wanted to sing in the choir. And so um so I was one of those kids, and then I just grew to kind of really enjoy church. And I think um it was at a pivotal age that things shifted for me. Like when I did move from my home church to the church where I am today, I think it was a crucial time frame. And that church, the church that I'm at today, really catered a lot to, going into that young adult period, going into those 17, 18 years, teenage years is pretty pivotal. It's a different kind of, you start losing the whole, dependency on family and on, doing what your parents is telling you to do. And you kind of get to that space where now it's, what do I want to do? Right? Where, who am I really? And I think it's important the village that's around you, especially at that age.
You said you was 4 or 5 when you got baptized?
Yes, I was 4. For the record, I was 4. I was turning 5 in the next month, but I was 4 years old. I can remember it and I don't remember a lot of things, but I remember that because it was a Tuesday. Tuesday night is when they did it at my grandfather's church, and I was asleep. I had to wake up. They singing, "Take me to the water." It's like, okay, here we go. All of this because I want to sing
So
in the
you,
choir.
I mean, I don't know. I thought like you had to be a certain age to get baptized.
In some churches they do, and I understand it, trust me. And I have actually since gotten rebaptized. I've gone to like several different missions trips and things, and on one of my trips we actually were baptizing. And I just went ahead and did it again as I've gotten older and truly understood what it all meant. But yeah, at my church, there was not an age limit. I mean, obviously, you had to understand. And again, I told you my mother prepared me well. I understood and was able to talk about what I knew baptism to be, and that I had accepted Christ, you know. And so, yeah, I got baptized early.
One of the things you said was you did change churches when you were young. You were pretty young when you changed the church.
So I was 16. I was turning 17 in the same month when I I was praying to God because I felt myself, as I was a student in high school, go Rams, and met some amazing friends there. And it was amazing because when you're in your own bubble, in your own world, this is why I think exposure is key for youth and young adults, and that is going to forever be a mission of mine, is to help the young people be exposed. But for so long I lived in my bubble, which was my family, my church, and being exposed in high school to some young individuals who were active in their churches and things. We kind of connected, and I remember maybe like my sophomore year praying to God, just like, hey, I was hanging out. I had two different crowds. I had a crew that was like more, they were in high school talking about Jesus and anointing doors and all of that. And then I had the crew that I knew from the neighborhood, right? And this was my crew that, we went to the house parties, and we might have smoked the Black and Miles and had all the craziness going on. And so I was literally like, it was a war within. And I remember, just some things kind of leading up to my decision. But it was all about, I always had a heart for, I was a part of something called Brothers and Sisters United Barsu. I don't know, if you're familiar with it, but it was, we had a lot of, singing and stepping and all that. And a lot of them were actually coming to my church. And this was the church that I grew up in. And so I put together a whole plan and proposal, and was like telling my uncle at the time, who was the pastor, like, hey, let's, can we do all of this? And, he didn't say no, but he sure didn't say yes. And so I was like, okay, well, that's fine. No worries, So I ended up, so I was praying, like I said, in that, because I felt like, maybe I wasn't ready. It wasn't time for me to like step out there and do that if I was living like a double life. And so I prayed to God for a father figure, and we had a revival. And typically, the young people, what we do is we sang, we did, all of that. But when it was time for the word, we went downstairs, we talked, we had fun. That was us connecting. But this pastor wouldn't let us do that. He was like, "All right, choir, y'all come on down to the front and sit right here." And I was like, no, I'm going to the back. But needless to say, but that was like seriously a defining moment because I learned so much that week of revival. And I just connected with the pastor from that day forth. And he's my dad now, like literally my dad. He has been there for me. Even as my biological father transitioned, he took the mantle, and yeah, you wouldn't know unless I said it. So definitely, and that's the church I started going to from the time I turned technically 17 until now. And yeah.
Was you nervous or scared about changing churches?
So yeah, initially I wasn't even thinking that that's what I was gonna do. I just remember being invited to a youth service that they had. This was happening the right after the revival. And when I went there, it was like I said, exposure is key. Where I was kind of used to a more, I'll just say traditional, for lack of a better word. Because I don't think tradition is bad, but it was just very rigid, kind of worship, not as spirited, I would say. When I got to this church, it was completely different. Where like my previous church, the youth, we had like a Sunday. That was our Sunday. And this church, like, it was all like woven together where it was the youth were just, they were just like a part of it at every service. And so I just really fell in love with it. So I went back that Sunday and I had a friend at my church, my home church. We would just walk down there. It was a walk away, in DC off Minnesota Avenue, literally just walking down Minnesota Avenue. So, it was a different time back then. And And yeah, and that's what we did. And every Sunday I went back and back. And after 3 months, I joined that church. My family, my mother, my grandparents, because all of my family was going to my church. They all, were very open for me to do that at that age.
To a different thought. Early in the conversation, you were saying like you was running with two different crowds and you felt conflicted. So how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think, for me, it really just took me deciding, making a decision. And I don't think I would have ever really gotten to a place of wanting to even make a decision if I had not um, s- have started going to my current church, Good Success. So it really was, and I'll be very transparent. I was running with the two crowds probably, even a year later, after that, after having a prayer and a conversation with God and even joining the new church. Just because, you still have moments and times where you are being pulled in different directions, but it was really, going to church, hearing the word, and really making a decision that, as I was coming upon graduation and thinking about, what I wanted to be and where I wanted to go in life, a lot of that really caused me to, focus more on what I knew was more of my purpose, like where I was being drawn to. And the reality is, you know, I think because and I'll always say it, my love for music, um, it really helped. That was the way that still is the way that God communicated to me. I always felt like even when I was going through rough situations, if I just, sing a worship song, um, or even listen, right? If I'm not even able to sing it myself, there's a lot of times God is just speaking through that. But I've also, encountered like seeing some very close losses. Near me I had a young cousin, and I have a pretty large size family. I can't say that around everybody because some people's family is like huge. But I had a young cousin who doing the right things but was in the army and passed away. And all those things when you don't necessarily think about, you know, how long you're going to be here, right? We don't know if tomorrow is truly promised. We just take those kind of things for granted. It all really kind of put things in perspective for me. Like I'm still a deep thinker, I always was, and always will be probably, but all of those things combined and then wanting, again, being exposed. I was fortunate to go on some trips. Like I said, I did some missions work. We sang in a couple, we did some tours in Germany and other places that really helped me to see, like, this is, more of the life that I want to live rather than, filtrating my lungs and being in a situation where I'm just not really coherent, not knowing, who I am. So, yeah, that's ultimately what led to it. But I would just say it's just important who you hang around with. My dad always says, who you hang around with is who you become.
Mm.
And I truly believe that who you hang around with definitely dictates, you know, your outcome, your destiny. If you hanging around bank robbers, you at some point you're gonna be driving a getaway car, no matter what. Like that's you might it's gonna hit close to home, but if you are, hanging around people who are owning businesses and doing great things, then that could be your plight as well, right? That you also are doing great things. So,
I'm glad we got to that point because that's really how the conversation even the idea of the conversation came about because we were talking about youth, and you feel like you feel like they're disconnected from church. If you had to take a guess, what would you say that one of the biggest reasons is?
If I had to take a guess, I would say one of the biggest reasons is um, that churches today have not, and I'll say this with, again, it is my opinion, so I don't necessarily need the grace umbrella, if you will, but I will say that it's because churches haven't really embraced um, young people. Like I said, when I grew up, while I love the foundation, I love the Christian education that I received, and there's a lot of, just other life learned lessons that you'll pick up by being around people who are, Christians, but there really wasn't a space. I didn't feel like in the worship space outside of singing that there was anything else for me. Even in the way in which like the word was delivered. Sometimes it was just completely going over my head. It wasn't relevant to the day in which I was living, right? There were certain things where it felt like it was more of like more of a facade, right? It wasn't, um, what I believe was necessary for especially young adults, kids, as you are transitioning out of the phase from where I have to go because my parents is forcing me to that stage of now I have the choice to decide if this is something that's for me. And when I got to good success, which is the church I'm at now, one of the things that, that I enjoyed was we had small groups, right? Where like if you were dealing with certain situations, you could be a part of. We had, the word was very applicable to, today's, to like, it was just relevant to me, right? It may have been talking about like literally coming down my street. It wasn't just a word that was given the history of, the Bible. And I'm not knocking that. I think it's great to know all those things, but it was talking about like, you know, if you're out there and you're smoking weed, or you're doing this, it was very applicable. And I think a lot of times churches are missing that opportunity to really connect with people in general, not just young people, but definitely the young people. And I believe even in youth ministry now, the ways I think, I would say I'm most effective when I'm able to just be transparent with them, and I'll say, look, here's something I struggle with, or here's something that I'm praying for right now. Then I oftentimes will hear them now open up, or I see them open up and say, like, well, I was dealing with that too, or here's something I'm dealing with. So I think the level of transparency was just not there. That would be one of the biggest things that I would say. But I think, I know you didn't ask this question. The next thing is going to be more around just experience, um, experiencing God truly. A lot of times we know about God, we talk about God in churches, right? You see people praising God. Um, but to really experience God, it's just that next level, and that requires a level of freedom that I think, a lot of churches today have, but back in my day they didn't. And still, I still go into many churches, fortunate to be in that space to do that, and I love it. But I go into spaces where, it's very much so, it's not as free. People are, I don't know if it just seems like they may be afraid to really praise God or feel free enough to just, you know, allow God's presence to fully dwell. So I would definitely say those are two of the things that I believe strongly.
What do you define as freedom?
Yeah, I love that question. Um, so what I define as freedom is truly allowing God to kind of lead the worship experience. A lot of times, right? I mean, we're going to have a program. You might even have an outline. You might have it mapped out, right? Being a business leader, those are things you do, right? You try to have, things in decency and order, and that's perfectly fine. But freedom is when you allow, maybe this is the flow that we have. But if God is taking things in a different direction, you know, we may not necessarily, get to communion today, right? Because worship is just at a wonderful place where people are really receptive and maybe God is doing something. We're not going to, where I remember in times growing up, we would stop certain situations where people were fully engaged, right? but we would stop that because we had to get to the next thing on the agenda. And so freedom says, look, we're not programmed by a program, right? We're not going to be held hostage by what's on paper. We're going to be free to let God do what he's doing. And if that means that we have a family here that, is struggling and they might want to tell their testimony, or there's, the Spirit of God is really, moving mightily in a particular song, we might stay there for a minute. And let God do what he's doing. And so I think that level of freedom is important. And really giving people an opportunity to do something that they don't typically do. I think the way that I've really came to know God was by being in a space where, you know, I could just ask him, like, show me yourself, right? And I'm not saying that you couldn't do that at home, but there's something about corporate worship that really, especially if you see somebody next to you going off, you're like, they shouting, is that real? Like, what is going on here? That lady just ran across the whole pulpit. What is happening? And and I'm like, God, this is real? Show me. And sure enough, he showed me. And everybody's different. So it doesn't really look like, you sure. I'm not gonna say I know we have people that, try to mimic what they see. But there is truly an authentic space where God will meet you just as all you have to do is ask and be sincere about seeking. That I think in a place of freedom, you allow people that opportunity to really experience that. So, and I love it. We have our young adults. Even just past Sunday, we had a young adult who was just talking about how she never experienced God, and when she did, it was just like it's a place you can't describe. It was a perfect feeling. She never thought that it was true until, she was in a free space to worship and truly ask God, and he met her there. So
What age would you define as youth?
that's a good question because I have okay, for youth, I typically will say from, you know, as young as you can talk until, meaning, talk or walk and be a part, engaged in the ministry. That could be 3, 4, 5. Just depends on the parents and how they want them to be a part of it. But we take the babies as young as 3 um, to 16, 17. I say
Mhm.
16, 17 because some people graduate high school, and they might be a little older depending on when they started, or a little younger. So I kind of go up until high school age. Now, within that, of course, we break them out, right? So you have a couple different groups. So we'll do um, like your younger kids until about 8 or 9, and then we'll do the 10 o'clock, the ages 10 to 15, and then we'll do like your teenagers, or more senior teenagers, 15, 16, up until they graduate from high school. And then young adulthood typically starts from the time that you graduate high school. I have some people in my young adults group they just never leaving. They like in their 50s.
I'm
So,
gonna tell you why. I'm gonna tell you why I asked because depending on the age, I feel like my age group, and from what I'm seeing, and I from and this I don't have a lot of data to go by, but it seems like my people my age, I'm 46, maybe a little older, a little younger, we're kind of that group that didn't go to church every Sunday anymore. Like once we got old enough, we kind of stopped going to church.
yeah.
So because of that, your kid, if you're not going to church, your kid's not going to go to church.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a factor too.
That is, I agree. And in fact, I kind of started reverse engineering it where if I appeal to your kids, then sometimes I can get some of the young adults to come back. And why I say that is because the truth is, most people, they want their kids to be in church or be
Mhm.
around people that are positive or be around a community that's going to pour into them. And I do a couple of events throughout the year. one's coming up usually in the springtime. Then we do like a big harvest event. And it is geared really to, bringing the kids in. We'll have a theme. Like, we did fruit of the spirit or something. We may do a scavenger hunt, make it very fun. We'll bring food, all kinds of treats, and, then different activities that's geared around, them expressing their talents because kids love to dance. They love to sing. They're figuring out like what are some of their, from their art standpoint, or even if it's STEM. I have like a nephew, he's big into, the video games, or even, doing things on a more of a science or math, standpoint, whether it's, some of the, getting deep into some of the, whether it's the stars and all that kind of stuff. But depending on what it is, like we do try to appeal to kids different, the different arts, the different learning styles, the different subject matters. And I found that when we, let's say we're doing a dance, or it's a creative arts is what we call it, Sunday, the kids will come and they'll learn the dances, they'll learn the songs, and then they'll bring tribes of people from their parents to their godparents to their cousins, and we have been able to use that as even a it's been an effective tool. Not that we were trying to, it's been an effective evangelism tool because the kids now are like, I want to go, I want to go. And so that definitely helps. And I do think that, when I do those events, I even try to have something for the adults that allows for them to kind of, if they want to stay, right, allows for them to kind of connect, even if it's just in a small group setting, just to decompress and talk through with other individuals who might be in, some of the same spaces in life. But I think at the end of the day, community is big. Um, and, from a church perspective, we spend a lot of time focusing on, um, beating people over the head in terms of what the word might say about this, that, and the third. But if I look at the way Jesus walked the earth, even one of my favorite stories of the Bible is when Jesus was talking to the lady at the well. And, he pretty much, showed and modeled that it wasn't about any tradition because it was a Sunday. There were certain things that, people didn't do or didn't say. He even took a different route because obviously he knew that he was on assignment. But he just showed that having a simple, casual conversation with someone that a Christian back in those days, right, would have been like, you don't talk to those people. um, he modeled for us the importance of just having a casual conversation that, could lead to divine revelation. And he literally was able to have this conversation with this lady who, had some challenges and had, she was, in her own right, she had several men right throughout her life, none of which were her husband. And he said all of these things to her, but in a way that she could relate, and then and could get saved and literally go back and tell others that she met a man that knew her and helped her, right? And I think that's where we're supposed to be in the world. It's not about how you look, how you dress, how you coming in here, don't touch this table, don't do this. I think you just like, man, how, what do you need, right? How can we help? If you're struggling as a parent, if you're struggling as thinking about the young adults, right? You're struggling financially, you're struggling in your career, like having services and, I call them small groups where you can get together and work together, find ways. I've been fortunate to, employ some of my young adults at the church, right? And help in that regard. So, just I think that's what life is really about in Christ. It's not necessarily about all of the, you know, the traditional stuff of a church.
Do you feel like the youth find it, because I mean it's not too much different for them, but like just finding it difficult to live the life as a Christian, like live by the Bible, like especially in these times with things being so challenging. Do you
Hmm.
think that's a factor too? Just trying to live up to being a Christian, or
Yeah, I think that society, the world, the church, none of it has done. the what it really means to live right as a Christian has nothing has done it any justice. And I think that the reality is like it doesn't matter who you are. You could be the pastor. Everybody is struggling. Everybody has some level of a struggle. We are human, right? We live in this flesh, and the reality is, you know, Paul talks about it. Like we're at a war. You're at war with good and evil all the time. You have a decision to make. And sometimes you don't make the right decision, which is why, we have, and it's unfortunate, but and it gets really pumped up because it's like you get the chief pastor of this church or that, they're caught doing something. But the reality is we're all human. So I do think that the pressures you know, of what it takes to live a righteous life. Yes, I believe that people are intimidated by that, but really it's more of, them just not that's we just didn't make a decision yet to say, look, this is where I want to be. And I think it's because we're thinking about all the things that we are giving up, but not really enough about all the wonderful things that we're gaining. And I like to have a good balance. I'm gonna be honest. Like that's me. I am all about having a good balance. And I think that, you know, when you accept Jesus, you have the Holy Spirit that convicts you. So if you feel conviction in the space, then I think you need to respectfully, bow out gracefully or, say, all right, this is not for me. But if you don't, and I'm not saying that as a license to sin or a license to do any of that, but I just feel like, there's certain things that I know why in churches and even when it's like your parents, right? They're going to tell us you need to, eat your vegetables, right? You know that you need to eat your vegetables because of how good it is for you, right? But the reality is, if you ate a whole plate of vegetables always, without any protein ever in life, you might find some issues, right? At some point, there's going to be some challenges that you're going to have, which is why, people, even in a plant-based life, they still find ways to get protein in. Um, I feel like the same way. Like there are things, it doesn't always have to be one whole way just because, it's good for you, right? You can create that balance, but knowing what those levels are that you need or what you want to do to enjoy, right? You have to be able to put it in perspective. But I do think sometimes it's just so black and white for individuals that they feel like it's just nothing. I'm not ready to do that. I hear that all the time. I got to get myself ready to come to church. When I get myself together, I'll come, or when I get myself together, I'll do that. But it's like, how can I really get myself together, right? Like,
You mentioned community earlier, and that's very important in church. But now you got the online community because a lot of churches are going to streaming.
hmm
So how do you feel that's affecting just youth in general?
So I definitely think it has its effects. And to be totally honest, I'm not opposed to it, right? I feel like, I'm never trying to just overly recruit to one place. I feel like, if it's really truly effective for you, because you might live in I've been in other countries where, and I always tell people we take for granted the fact that we can clap our hands. I remember being on a mission trip and where we were, you couldn't clap in church. Like you could not do certain things. And so saying that to say, you might live somewhere far away and God has really worked through this particular ministry to be a blessing to you. And so, online church is where it's at. I think if that works for you, you have to be honest with yourself. Then it works. And if you feel like you are getting what you need, I know that there are people who, just like if working from home works great for you, it doesn't work. My sister literally called me today. She's like, I don't see how y'all work from home. Like she's working from home this week. She says, I can't do it. I need to be in the office around people. She works in healthcare, so I get it. And so I just say whatever works for you, if it truly works. But there are people who need a hug, or they might want a shoulder to lean on, or they might, just need that physical touch or to just be in the space with someone. Maybe they don't feel like they're as truly engaged. Like some of us have, attention issues. So online, that might be working for like the first 10 minutes. Then, we get a knock at the door, something else happening. So it might not work. You got to be honest with yourself. But I do like having that option. And I think any growing church that wants to continue to build their youth and young adults, they need to have a virtual space just as well as a physical space. I think at this point, it's like equally important.
Do you think the church is doing a good job of evolving with the youth? Because it's just a lot of child. Like I know when I talk to people, right, and we talk about how we grew up, but these kids, they're different. Like,
They're
and
different.
to be fair to them, we don't have the challenges that they have. Like just so much with social media, so much they get exposed to. Like we didn't get exposed to this stuff that they
Yeah.
get exposed to. So what do you think about like how important is like that factor?
Yeah, I think it is something that we have to consider. In fact, in our youth ministry, and I'm fortunate to just kind of literally just provide oversight, but we have some great leaders. But one of the things that they use a lot of the tools, like a lot of the apps that are out there, to keep the kids engaged. Because you're right, like they're different. I have a 2-year old niece, and sometimes she ignores me because she's in her phone looking at YouTube, and I'm like, "Ma'am, did you hear me? Good morning." Like, and I have to remove the phone, and it's like she did not hear me. And so, understanding where the kids of today are, you have to meet them where they are. And so we use a lot of different interactive tools. We use things that allow for them to use because everybody has a phone. Use their phones. If not, we even provide, electronic devices for them, tablets or computers. Um, we have the TV screen. So we have to be very agile, if you will, to making sure that we are meeting the needs of all the kids that come through. So we do have the Champions Church. So they'll be in the service up until it's time for the word, and then we take them out into another space. They have like the younger kids where they might go through listen to a story and color. Then, some of the older kids, where again, like I said, it's more, they're using electronic devices to meet them where they are, similar to what they do in school, to really appeal to, their attention. And it's amazing how they open up after they've gone through some of these exercises. And you're like, wow, y'all really going through something. You're like 9 years old. Goodness, but yeah, it's the life that we live in. The word talks about it. So,
You have a lot of passion for the youth. Where does that come from?
yeah, I don't know. I guess I would say, I was just really fortunate at a young age to just always be around, all my family. And I kind of feel bad even for my next generation of family because I don't think that my cousins and I have done a great job of keeping them really close. So a part of the passion is, I try to do things that bring everybody together. But I just know that the youth are really there. I mean, they're beyond just being our future. They're really our present. And, if we're going to evolve and even, if we want to see better or greater things, right? We always say greater things do we want the next generation to do. We have to pour into them and it's kind of hard. We don't want to wait until they're even in their teens. You want to get them while they're very young. And I think it's important to expose. Like I was blessed to be exposed. And I think if I hadn't gone to the countries that I've gone to or even been able to, go to different churches in the area or see different things, whether it's, you know, from sporting events to all kinds of things. I think exposure is key. And so I've always gravitated. I have godchildren, appointed ones and ones that I've, kind of adopted over time. And so, and I think not having any children of my own right now has been, has helped me to kind of focus in on that aspect of it, where I can kind of, I can have your child all day and see some things and then, send them right on back. So I'm not up close and personal. So I can kind of see it from a different lens. And that I think has helped. But also, I'm fortunate to, be very close with my nieces and my nephew, and even my younger siblings. So.
You mentioned just dealing with youth and ironically not having any kids. With everything going on in the world, do you want to have kids?
So yes and no. I mean, so let me say, yes, I do want to have kids. Like that was always from a child, I always wanted to have kids, right? Um, I am at a place where I'm not allowing that to define like how I'm moving, if that makes sense. So like if it doesn't happen before childbearing age has ended and concluded, I'm perfectly fine with it and very content with that. But I would say yes, only because it was just I just feel like I've always been a nurturer. Like that's just been a part of, you know, me since I was young. So yeah, so maybe it's more of a that's, that was the idea. But if it doesn't happen, I believe I have enough kids around me to be perfectly okay. And I'll be very transparent, having a 2-year-old very close to me, definitely, makes me wonder. You know, I mean, I know it would be a task at 40, 40 plus. It
Yeah.
would be a task for sure.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how encouraged are you that you can drive the youth back to church?
So I am very encouraged. I think a scale of 1 to 10, I'll give it an 8 right now.
Okay.
Um, because I do think that, with current events, things that are happening in the world and, politics all over, and even just seeing where this world is going with like AI and all that, I do believe that, and I've seen it. I believe that the church is starting to position itself a lot better in meaning, and I know, use two positives, but meaning since the pandemic where we have, unfortunately, there were some churches that did not make it through, the pandemic. Um, but I believe that a lot of those ministries, some of which, are being forced to kind of team together, come together. I think as churches realize the importance of a lot of the things we talked about, social media, making sure you have, a virtual space, making sure that you are being more sensitive and less judgmental, being more like Jesus was, right? Loving on people, and making sure that we are focusing on some of their needs versus, what might be, a tradition or what we believe should happen in church, really allowing for those free spaces. I'm seeing more and more in that. That is very encouraging to me. And then I also am seeing more, you know, younger kids with a God consciousness. I was fortunate to go to like this worship event a couple weeks ago, and there's like, this young girl, she's probably, I don't know, less than probably 6 or 7, was just dancing freely. And then there were other kids there as well doing the same thing. And, that's very encouraging. A lot of times, when I'm with my nieces and nephew, I may strike up a song or put on a worship song, you know, and we just demonstrate what it is, that our hearts are feeling at that time. And then you'll start to see that from them. So I do think that because of a lot of what's going on and what has even, is yet to happen, people are going to start building more of a God consciousness. I think similar to the way the pandemic did that. Of course, it was a very convenient way as well, but that opened up a whole space for people who weren't going into the church building to be like, even to this day, I still have friends I haven't seen since the pandemic at church. It's like, well, I tune in on church. I tune in. And I'm like, keep tuning in, baby. Like, I'm cool with it. If that works for you, right? At some point, we got to realize it ain't always about, we being together. Like, it's okay. So,
Last question. The age you are now,
hmm
if you could go back to 14-year-old Jayna,
Ooh.
what would you tell her is the best reason to establish a relationship with God?
Wow, yeah. I would tell her at 14, which was 5 years before I think I really encountered God. Um, I would tell her to the important thing is, it's also my one of my favorite scriptures. Um, Seek ye first the kingdom of God, his righteousness, right? And all things will be added unto you. And I think I would tell her that if you continue to seek God, truly seek God, no matter what, and his righteousness, meaning, you try to live right, try to do right by people, try to be the best version of who he created you to be, then all things will align. You will get, the things that you want, the things that you need, they will be added unto you. And it doesn't mean that it happens in the timing that you think they're going to happen, but it'll happen in God's timing. And so, live life in a very content state and not being anxious for anything that, you know, that is not for you at that time. So, yeah, I was an anxious 14-year-old. So,
Well, listen, thank you for doing this. Thank you for having this
yeah.
conversation with me. I appreciate it. I wish you all the best because I know you doing a lot of work to bring the youth back to church. So I wish you all the best because I mean, in these times we definitely need God. So
Yes.
I definitely your success is the world's success. So I'm praying for you.
Thank you. I need the prayers and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Is there anything like do you want people to follow your church or get in touch with what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. My church is Good Success Christian Baptist Church. We are in Northeast DC. We are going to be having starting a young adult youth service on Saturdays. It's slated for the third Sunday in April. So that is a little over a month from now. And so more information to come on our social media of when and how we're gonna be laying that out. But it's an hour service on a Saturday, just trying to reach some of our young adults who we know work on Sundays or just can't get up as early with all the kids to come and have a good time on for 1 hour on a Saturday, 5 to 6 p.m. That's before anything gets started and after everything else is done. So, but yeah, other than that, that's pretty much it.
Well, again, thank you for doing this. And again, I wish you all the best with your mission of bringing the youth back to church.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate the opportunity.
definitely. I want to take the time to thank everyone for listening to the podcast and watching it. I truly appreciate your support. You can follow me on Instagram at conversations underscore with underscore Lant. My Facebook is also conversations with Lant. You can listen to the podcast on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. You can watch the podcast on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe. Again, thank you all for supporting and listening. Have a great day.